So in this week, we are going to maybe shift gears just a little bit and talk a little more about law and policy, but perhaps from the paradigm of state statutes rather than federal law and policy. Now, some of this discussion will be the same or similar, but you'll find that across various states, some things are handled in differing manners from others. So let us begin by just taking a look at some of the overview information that is shared from the publisher regarding Chapter 4 in the textbook. And we can see that the state of California was a rather early adopter in the cyber arena, where, well, now over 30 years ago, they implemented the first cyber stalking law. And then about 8 years later, they expanded the law to cover some new territory, new ground. What you'll find is in the crafting of laws, whether they be at the federal level, state, or even regionally, that wording and the crispness of meaning is sometimes an elusive thing. What gets put down and hammered out originally sometimes results in some unintended consequences. Some loopholes exist that were not foreseen. And then we have to go back to the drawing board and rework the wording in the laws. The state of Texas, as you can see, put some stalking and harassment verbiage into their Penal Code 42.07, and it even covered some of the kind of cyber stalking and cyber harassment. You might not have guessed that one of the forward-looking states regarding stalking in the cyber realm would be the state of Louisiana. But in fact, they have some very explicit verbiage defining cyber stalking. So that cyber stalking is one of the areas of great concern. And you also know from our discussions thus far that one of the most pervasive crimes in an interconnected world is that of identity theft. The Alabama Consumer Identity Protection Act elevated that particular crime from a misdemeanor to a Class C felony. And we will look in just a few minutes from now at some of the North Carolina statutes that relate to things in the cyber realm, and maybe we'll understand the differences between those of misdemeanor and felony accusations and convictions. Florida has a statute, 817.568, that indicates that identity theft is a felony. And this will be the case even when there is no monetary or financial theft involved. There are other reasons people might assume an identity. Usually it is financially related, but sometimes it might be for blackmail purposes or just simple harassment. In the state of Idaho, they have a set of codified rules where they have a series of laws, and they broke the large crime of identity theft down into much smaller piece parts, and then had laws to address each of those. That may in fact be a smart thing to do, rather than biting off one big chunk, to have smaller nibbles at the pie. Another area that has grown and become, more, if you want to use the word efficient, because of the interconnectedness of resources and media, is that area of child pornography. We learned when we discussed the cache that the problem was worldwide, even in the 90s, in the very burgeoning stages of the internet. It's only grown bigger and more tentacles reaching out and more children harmed. In the state of Arkansas, they have several bills that have been passed that explicitly detail the very actions that constitute child pornography. And again, one of the takeaways that I want you to get from this discussion is that wording is powerful, and for a law to have substance, for it to stick, for convictions to stick, that the precision in language must exist. For lawyers to be able to make a case against a suspect, there has to be really a tight coupling between that suspect's actions and then what is codified on the books in law. In the state of Illinois, they have also addressed some areas of child pornography in an act called the Abused and Neglected Child Reporting Act. And that particular legislation, as you can see, it was designed to fight child abuse. So that aspect of the taking advantage of children. Back to California again, always an early adopter in many areas, partly because of the huge population in California. They have laws regarding obscenity and child pornography. They're in their California Penal Code 311, and they've chosen to speak quite clearly about the dissemination of the pornographic content. So there are, again, there's so many aspects of legalities that different states choose to focus their attention on some of these different ways in which crimes can be perpetrated. Probably in our very first or maybe second class period, when we talked about the different areas of technology crimes, one of those was unauthorized access. Maine has defined unauthorized access as, quote, a person is guilty of criminal invasion of computer privacy if the person intentionally accesses any computer resource knowing that the person is not authorized to do so. So there has to be a level of intent in the main wording of their law regarding unauthorized access. Coming back to our home state of North Carolina, the statutes are more extensive when we are talking about hacking. And we're going to look in just a minute at the North Carolina statute, specifically 14-454. I think that's the one that I have accessed for us to look at. And let's give that a look. There we go. Well, here's 14-453. I think we have it in succession. But this is a good place to start because Article 60 is talking about computer-related crime and begins with definitions. As I mentioned, the crispness of language and the common understanding of the framework is key when we're talking about codifying things into law. So why not start with some common verbiage in definitions? They define access, because that gets bantied about over and over again. It's good that we're all talking about the same action. So in North Carolina law, when we talk about access, we're meaning to instruct, communicate with, cause input, cause output, cause data processing, or otherwise make use of any resource of a computer system, or a computer network. So that pretty much draws a, an image around the word access and defines it in a fairly tight way. Another word that we use a lot when we are talking about computer-related crime is authorization. So it is important that we're all understanding the same definition. And in North Carolina law, authorization means having the consent or permission of the owner of the asset, or of the person licensed or authorized by the owner to grant consent or permission to access, again, a computer system, or a computer network, and to do that in a manner not exceeding the consent or permission. So when we talk about unauthorized access to a computer resource and having authorization, then it goes back to the original owner of the asset, or as it says, an authorized entity who is conferred that authorization by the owner. And we're certainly not going to read through every one of these, but I do urge you to do so. The law is in the section United States Computer Laws Part 2. And if you scroll down just a bit, you'll see here on the right-hand side, the North Carolina General Statute 14-453. And then we are also, we'll probably take a look at the general statute on cyber stalking as well. So let's scroll down a bit. You can see there's a definition for what a computer actually is, and our view of a computer may have changed over time. Here it's defined as any internally programmed automatic device that performs data processing or telephone switching. So in that aspect, if it is an internally programmed or automatic device, my watch in some aspects could be considered to be a computer, because it does talk or process data using the Bluetooth connection back and forth to my phone. And we have computer services, computer software, computer system. And let's take a look at the meaning of data. So data is the representation of information, facts, knowledge, concepts, or instructions that are prepared in a formalized or other manner and intended for use in a computer system, or computer network. So we talk sometimes about raw data and then processed data, but they're all under that umbrella of data. The definition here says that it may be embodied in any form. So could be computer printouts, but could also be information, knowledge, facts, instructions on optical media, on a hard drive. We talk about punch cards. That's sort of going back to the Stone Age. May be stored internally in the memory of the computer. In this particular definition, I do not see reference to data on the wire. That should probably be added, because sometimes we have data in motion, and man-in-the-middle attacks or sniffing attacks are sometimes targeted at that data that's moving, as we say, across the wire, even if it's not a physical wire. Okay. we move forward, we see lots of other definitions. Financial instrument is an interesting one. I urge you to read that definition. And now we'll move down to exceptions. So when we talk about statutes, laws, other areas of governments, it is important not only to talk about what is, but what is not. And these exceptions talk about where this article does not apply. It does not apply to any terms or conditions in a contract or license related to a computer, its network, software, etc. And it does not apply or prohibit any software or hardware designed to allow the computer, network, etc. to operate in its ordinary course of lawful business. So a lot of that is, we'll call it legalese, which I'm not a lawyer. I do not play one on TV. So I'm not going to try to instruct you on the nuances of legal verbiage. We'll keep it mostly at the layman's area in this course, but what I do want to impress upon you is that the language that is used in legal documents, in contracts, in statutes, in the legislative laws, just are what we call, there's a whole area called faultless communication, and we could probably have a whole class period talking about the ins and outs of that, but it's about precision in language, and that is so key when we're talking about writing things into law. We define the jurisdiction where this law is valid, where it is executable. And then we have a section 14.454 on accessing computers. And this particular section applies to an assignment that you will be doing in the course. So I think I want to direct you to that. That particular assignment, called North Carolina Computer Crime Laws, is not due until the week after this one, but at least I want to put it on your radar. And what will be due at the end of this week is the assignment on a case history and analysis of cyber stalking. So just want to bring those to your attention. And we can see there is, again, a North Carolina general statute that relates specifically to cyber stalking. So let's go back to the statute. Again, this is 14-454 in the North Carolina General Statutes, often abbreviated NCGS, and then the specific article or chapter and article number. And let's just start looking at the very beginning. And again, we're not going to comb through it together, but you will need to read it fairly carefully. It starts out saying it is unlawful to willfully, directly or indirectly access or cause to be accessed any computer, computer program, computer system, computer network, or any part thereof for the purpose of, and then we got two provisions: devising or executing any scheme or artifice to defraud, unless the object of the scheme or artifice is to obtain educational testing material. Okay, so we got some, what is and what is not there. But we cannot defraud if we're trying to produce a false educational testing score or a false academic record. Okay. And it is unlawful to willfully, directly, or indirectly access or cause to be accessed any computer for the purpose of obtaining property or services other than educational testing material. So you see, we've sort of forked off in two directions. Obtaining a false educational score or a false academic or vocational grade for a person by means of false or fraudulent pretenses. So a violation of this subsection is a Class G felony. And if the fraudulent scheme or artifice results in damages of more than $1,000, or if the property or services obtained are worth more than that $1,000. So there's the monetary codification that goes along with that action being a Class G felony. Any other violation of the subject of this subsection is a Class 1 misdemeanor. So we see that the amount of damages is very important in defining where the penalty falls. And you can see there's parts A, B, and C all related to the first section, 14-454. Then we go down and have 14-454.1, accessing government computers. And of course, there is verbiage relating specifically to those. And now 14-455. And then 456, denial of computer services to an authorized user. And then those get broken down into a .1 section relating to denial of a government computer service to an authorized user. And extortion is discussed, computer trespass and the penalty thereof for that. And we are down now to cyber bullying and the penalty for that action. We can see that in the cyberbullying arena, the law states, except as otherwise made unlawful by this article, it shall be unlawful for any person to use a computer or a computer network to do any of the following, with the intent to intimidate or torment a minor. So build a fake profile or a website, pose as a minor, and interact with that other individual who is under the age of majority follow that minor online or into a chat room, and post or encourage others to post on the internet private, personal, or sexual information pertaining to the minor, with the intent to intimidate or torment a minor or the minor's parent or guardian, is also discussed in this statute. You may not post a real or doctored image of the minor on the internet, access, alter, or erase any computer network data, program, software, and then it even goes into breaking into a password protected account or stealing or accessing passwords. And thirdly, use a computer system for repeated, continuing, or sustained electronic communications, including email or other transmissions to a minor. You can see that in the wording, even though this focused on electronic mail, there's this additional or other transmission that is good practice in creating legal verbiage, because times change, means of communication change. So where electronic email, electronic mail may have once been the primary method of communication, we can see things moving to the chat space, SMS messaging, and other means of communicating back and forth. And we can see there also paragraph 3, 4, 5, and 6 on this topic. And it goes on. Cyberbullying is then broken down into the subject or the object of the bullying being a school employee by a student. And that is a fairly long statement there. And they even have a paragraph reserved for future codification purposes. So there is a bit of forward-looking planning in this particular statute in our home state of North Carolina. Okay. So as a final topic in the class today, I want to, let's see, share my screen, optimize it for sound, and choose the appropriate window. I guess we'll just share it in general. And listen to this TEDx talk. So TED Talks are a trademarked packaging of information, and certain local regions or communities, often large universities, also have independently organized TED events. So this is one from the Santa Catalina School.
So what we're going to look at is cybercrime, and it's a growing threat. And I'd like to start out by showing you what the upward trend looks like. What we have here is a chart that shows that the number of cybersecurity incidents rose from about 5,500 in 2006 up to over 67,000 in 2014. These are just incidents that hit federal government agencies in the US. Globally, and across all sectors, the number of incidents is estimated to have risen from about 9 million in 2010 to over 43 million in 2014. Now, many cyber crimes are represented by these incidents. And in particular, any crime that steals data, sabotages data, or makes data unavailable. All of those crimes represent security incidents. And then there's a pile of additional crimes that don't fall in that area. And that includes things like child exploitation in cyberspace and also internet scams. The global cost of all these crimes is estimated to be on the order of $400 to $600 billion annually. And that's roughly in the same ballpark as narcotics crimes. So in the remainder of the talk, what I'm going to do is give you 7 reasons why cybercrime has been on the rise. And the first reason is that it pays, it's very easy, and the chances of you getting caught are pretty low. So why does it pay? Well, today, all of our money is online. And in many cases, the criminals will get direct access to our bank accounts, and they will transfer money straight out of our accounts into theirs. In other cases, they will hack into companies like Target and Home Depot, and they will download tens of millions of credit and debit cards. And they will take this information and they will, in some cases, convert it to make counterfeit cards, and then they'll withdraw money from ATM machines from your account. Or they might just sell the card information in the computer underground, or they might just go on a shopping spree at your expense. Now, not all of the crimes are financial. We've also got lots of spies. They're stealing corporate data and government data. And in some cases, there are students who thought maybe they could get better grades by hacking into their school systems. I don't recommend doing that. A couple students in Southern California were recently arrested for trying. And activists have also found that cyber attacks make for an interesting way of protesting. And what you see on the right here is you see one of the first web defacements to have taken place almost 20 years ago now. And somebody hacked the home page of the Department of Justice, and they changed it to read Department of Injustice, and they were protesting something called the Communication Decency Act. Well, in that case, that particular act was eventually ruled unconstitutional. Okay, the second reason why cybercrime is on the rise is that there's just way too many doors, and the number of doors is going up every year. So if we go back in time to the 1940s, when the first computers were appearing, there was just a handful of computers. They were big, they were clunky, expensive, and they were not connected. And there was no cybercrime. In fact, cybercrime didn't start happening until the 60s. Okay, and then it was just, computer crime, it was mostly embezzlement, okay, or people taking sledgehammers to computers because they hated them. So right now, we've got about 3 billion people online, and they are using anywhere from 5 to 15 billion devices. And all of these devices are connected, and all those connections represent doors. And on top of the obvious doors with the connections, most of these devices have vulnerabilities in them. And so that creates backdoors, and somebody's going to find them. Going forward in time, the estimates are that there's going to be 25 to 50 billion devices online in what some people refer to as the Internet of Things, because everything is going to be connected. And those things are, a lot of them, going to have backdoors in them. The third reason why cybercrime is on the rise is that security is just not very convenient. And so if you're like me, you're working away on your computer, you're trying to get something done, and all of a sudden this window pops up telling you you have to do a critical update, or otherwise hackers are going to take over your computer. So do you stop and do the update? Well, sometimes, but maybe not. Right? You put it off. Another example is passwords. So we all know we're supposed to pick good passwords. And I hope none of you are seeing any of your passwords on this list, because these have all been hacked. Whenever a hacker gets into a server and they download the password file, they start cracking them, and these always show up. The recent attack on the Ashley Madison cheating site, these same passwords showed up. And there were some other gems too, like one of my favorites was, quote, "I should not be doing this." And another good one was, quote, "the best password ever." And then a third example here of the inconvenience. This has to do with encryption. So encryption is a really powerful tool. If you encrypt up your data and somebody gets access to it, they can't make any sense out of it. It just looks like gibberish. The problem is it's not very convenient, especially not convenient for communications. Because if you are messaging with somebody else, you have to be using the same kind of encryption. Well, what we have here is a tweet from somebody by the name of Joseph Bonneau. And he had sent an encrypted email to a guy by the name of Phil Zimmerman. And it was encrypted with something called Pretty Good Privacy, or PGP. And Zimmerman had written back saying, "I can't decrypt this. I don't have PGP running on any of my devices." Do you have PGP running on your devices? No, right? I don't either. But what's interesting here is that Phil Zimmerman is the person who developed PGP. To make matters worse, the bad guys are pretty good with encryption. This is an example of something called ransomware. And it's called CryptoLocker, this particular example. And the way you get this on your computer is you open up one of those attachments you're not supposed to open up. And you do not want this on your computer because it encrypts up all your data and it won't give you the key to decrypt it unless you pay up. And there's a little clock ticking. At the time this screenshot was made, there was about 54 hours left. And that's all the time you have to pay up before your data is gone forever. I think about 500,000 people got hit with that one. Next reason for the rise in cybercrime is that there's lots of flaws in software. This shows there's thousands of new vulnerabilities found in software every year. These are vulnerabilities in your operating system, your browser, your applications. They're all over the place. Even the security products, your antivirus, these things have flaws too. And now this is just software flaws, and there's all the vulnerabilities that come from bad passwords and not doing security updates and opening attachments and all that. The actual largest vulnerability is the human being. Well, this is what happens when a new vulnerability is found in software. Okay, is somebody develops an exploit for it, and then the criminals all start using it, and the attacks skyrocket. They can go up by 5 orders of magnitude. That's 100,000 times. The heart, the bleeding heart there, represents more than just the sad state of affairs. Okay, that's the actual logo of a vulnerability called Heartbleed. And if somebody exploits that vulnerability, they can get your password when you log into a supposedly secure HTTPS site. Now, this vulnerability was found over 18 months ago. As of a couple of weeks ago, there were still at least 200,000 sites out on the internet that had not done their security updates. You do not want to go to one of those sites. Now, as we talked about before, security updates, they're not convenient. Well, it's even worse for companies than it is for us as individuals. Companies have to manage networks of hundreds or thousands of devices. A study by Kina Securities found that it takes companies 100 to 120 days to do security updates on average. But that after 60 days, the chances of the vulnerability being exploited are over 90%. Next reason is that building secure software, let's get rid of all these vulnerabilities, well, it's really hard. So how many of you in the audience have ever written more than, say, 10 lines of code? Right? A whole bunch of you. Okay, what about 1,000 lines of code? Not so many hands. Well, now imagine your devices, they're running tens or hundreds of millions of lines of code. The latest version of Windows is said to have more than 100 million lines of code just by itself. And it's very complex. And believe me, getting it all right is a humongous task. And so it ships with vulnerabilities. And the problem is aggravated because the companies are under market pressure to get to market first. One study found that 79% of companies, they actually ship products with known security vulnerabilities in them. To make matters worse, there's theoretical limitations on what we can do. Fred Cohen showed back in the 1980s that you could not write an antiviral tool that would detect all possible viruses. And then the technology is constantly evolving. There's new stuff coming out, new versions of everything is coming out, and it really is a task like Sisyphus, pushing the boulder up the hill. It goes on and on. Another reason is, and now sometimes people intentionally put back doors into products, and this can happen anywhere in the supply chain. A few years ago, a couple of students at MPS, they found 170 products that had malicious code placed in them in some place in the supply chain. Recently, someone found over 4,000 apps on Apple's iOS App Store that had malicious code in them. Now, it's not that the app developers did that on purpose to get you, although there are some that do that too. In this case, somebody had taken Apple's development kit, software development kit called Xcode. They had taken that and they put malicious code in it and they posted it up on a server in China. And then Chinese app developers would download that version of Xcode, probably because the download times would be faster from the Chinese server. And then all the apps that were developed with that tainted version of Xcode, the malicious code went straight into the apps. So not just to single out Apple here, is that Android phones. Android phones, somebody found that rogue retailers were taking Android phones that were manufactured in China, and they were intentionally putting malicious code in them before they sold them to customers. Okay, and then finally, the seventh reason for the growth in cybercrime here is that there's just shady sites in neighborhoods. And if you visit these sites, you can pick up malicious code, or you might just find yourself in some internet scam, or start getting lots of spam, or any number of other things that you'd probably rather not have to deal with. So these are top-level domains that I recommend you just stay clear of. .church, .gov, and .mil all have less than 1% shady sites. But it's not just shady sites. The hackers, they attack legitimate sites, and they put malicious code on those sites so that when you visit those sites, you get the malicious code. Sometimes that's called a drive-by download, because you don't even have to click on anything. You just go to the site. It turns out that about 4% of the top 1 million websites were found with malicious code that had been hacked onto them. And 1% of ads also have malicious software in them. So what do we do about all this? Well, there's not time to give you any solutions, but let me just say that there's no silver bullet. Okay, we can't just redesign the internet and redesign all our technology and all these gazillions of bytes of code, okay? And so I like to think of cybercrime as really just part of the problem of crime in general. We can't ever expect to really solve it, and yet we can't give up. It would be dumb to not lock your house or lock your car. Okay, so we have to constantly be diligent, always trying to do better, and control the risk. And let me just leave you with one thing. We need help, okay, in this area. And so there's lots of exciting job opportunities if you're thinking about what you might want to do when you finish all your schooling. We need people that are cybersecurity experts. We need software developers that understand the security issues so they can avoid them. We need cybercrime investigators, computer forensics examiners, and we need people that can educate our legislators so that when they start passing bills, the bills will make sense. And let me just end with one thought. I've been in this field now for more than 40 years, since the very early days. And I can promise you one thing, it is never boring.
So there you have it. Some more information on the challenges in the interconnected arena, but also opportunities for all of you that are studying in this field. So if you have not yet submitted the project that was due last evening on the cyber laws, please do so. And we'll see you in the next class period. Thanks for coming.